However, these philosophies can lead you to a deep mistrust of both your body and mind. You are told that the spirit is perfect, and so you can try to live up to standards of perfection quite impossible to achieve. The failure adds to the sense of guilt. You attempt then to further banish the characteristic enjoyment of your own creaturehood, denying the lusty spirituality of your flesh and the strong present corporeal leanings of your soul. You will try to rid yourself of very natural emotions, and so be cheated of their great spiritual and physical motion. On the other hand, some leaders may give little consideration to such issues, but still be deeply convinced of the misery of the human condition, focusing upon all the quote-unquote darker elements, seeing the world's destruction ever closer at hand without really examining the beliefs that arouse such constant feelings. They may find it easier to cluck their tongues at obvious fanatics who cry out for God's vengeance, and speak about the world's end in brimstone and ashes. They may be as equally convinced, however, of man's basic unworthiness, and so, of course, of their own. In daily life, such people will concentrate upon negative events, store them up, and unfortunately cause personal experience that will seem to quite reinforce the basic ideas. Here, in a different context, is the same denial of the worth and integrity of earth experience. In some such cases, all of the desirable human attributes are magnified and projected outward into a god or superconsciousness, while all the less admirable characteristics are left to the race and the individual. The individual therefore deprives himself of the use of much of his ability. He does not consider it his own, and is astounded when any others of his race display such superior qualities. To some extent, such beliefs follow certain rhythms in both civilizations and in time. The mind is a system of checks and balances, even as the body, and so often a set of beliefs that can be seen as highly negative will often serve beneficial ends in countering other beliefs. For some time, Western civilizations stressed a distorted version of intellectual reasoning, for example, and so the current stress about other portions of the self serves a purpose. The people alive within the world come into it with their own problems and challenges, and this will have much to do with the kind of national and worldwide beliefs that are generated and that dominate. The beliefs, of course, are frameworks in which various kinds of experience are tested. This also applies to religions and political and social situations as well. There is always a give and take between the individual and the mass system of beliefs in which he has chosen his environment. There is a belief in illness as being morally wrong, and a counter-belief in it as being ennobling, uplifting, and spiritually good. These value judgments are extremely important, for they will be reflected in your own experience with any illness or disease. Now, there are too many aspects of what you think of as health and illness to discuss even in a book that is directed to personal reality, in which the body plays such an important role. Health and illness are both evidences of the body's attempt to maintain stability. There is a difference in the overall health patterns in men and animals because of the quite diverse natures of their physical experience. More will be said about this particular subject later. Overall, however, in the animals, illness and disease play a life-giving role, keeping balance both within the species and between them, therefore ensuring the future existence of all involved. In their own ways, the animals are quite aware of this fact. Some of them even bring themselves to their own destruction through what you would call suicide, and en masse. At that level, the animals understand and are always in touch with deep biological connections in which they know their own continuances within the chain of nature. Man grants rich psychological activity to his own species, but denies it in others. There are as many luxuriant and diverse kinds of psychological movement as there are species, however. The cycles of health and disease are felt as rhythms of the body by the large variety of animals, and even with them, illness or disease has life-saving qualities on another level. Instinct is fairly accurate, for example, guiding the beasts to those territories in which proper conditions can be found, and even for them the well-being of the body represents physical evidence of their quote-unquote being in the proper place at the proper time. It reinforces the animals' sense of grace in terms mentioned earlier in this book. They understand the beneficial teaching quality of disease and follow their own instinctive way of treating it. In a natural situation, this might involve a mass migration from one territory to another. In such cases, the illness of only a few animals might send a whole herd to its safety and a new food supply. Man is so highly verbal that he finds it difficult to understand that other species work with idea complexes of a different kind, in which of course thought, as you consider it, is not involved. But an equivalent exists. Using an analogy, it is as if ideas are built up not through sentence structure reinforced by inner visual images, but by like quote-unquote mental patterns structured through touch and scent. In other words, thinking, but within a framework entirely different and alien to you. Such quote-unquote thinking exists using the analogy within the framework of instinct, whereas your own verbalized thoughts can also intrude outside of that framework. One of the main differences between you and the animals, and one of the significant meanings in terms of free will, is involved here. Animals, then, understand the beneficial directing elements of disease. They also comprehend the nature of stress as a necessary stimulant to physical activity. Observing even a pet, you will notice its marvelous complete relaxation, and yet its immediate total response to stimulus. So animals in captivity will fight to provide themselves with necessary health-giving stress factors. Animals, then, do not think of illness in terms of good or bad. Disease in itself on that level is a part of the life survival process and a system of checks and balances. With the emergence of man's particular kind of consciousness, other issues become involved. Mankind feels its own morality, even more than the beasts do. With the growth of this particular variety of self-consciousness came the exteriorization, magnification, and intensification of definite elements that lie latent in the other animals. The individuation of strong emotional activity to a new degree, for example. The emergence of the quote-unquote pause of reflection mentioned earlier, and the blossoming of memory along with the emotional intensification, led to a situation in which members of the new species recalled in the present the dead and the diseases that killed them. They became frightened of disease, particularly in the case of plagues. Man forgot the teaching and healing elements and concentrated instead upon the unpleasant experience itself. To some extent, this was natural, for the new species developed in order to change the nature of its consciousness, to follow a reality in which instinct was no longer quote-unquote blindly followed, and to individualize in strong personal focus corporeal experience that had previously taken a different pattern. Now, man has far greater leeway. He forms his reality according to his conscious beliefs, even while its basis lies in the deep unconscious nature of the earth in corporeal terms. Man's quote-unquote I am, seemingly apart from nature, a characteristic necessary for the development of his kind of consciousness, led him into value judgments and also necessitated some break with the deep inner certainties of other species. Illness, therefore, was experienced as quote-unquote bad. An entire tribe could be endangered by one sick member. At the same time, as the mind developed, cunning and memory became highly effective survival tools. In some societies or tribes, the old or infirm were killed lest their care take too much attention from the able-bodied and endanger the group. In others, however, the old were honored for the wisdom that they had accumulated with age, and they became very practical in tribes where many did not survive. History was dependent upon the old with their memory of past events, and the group's sense of continuity was also in the hands of its oldest members, who passed memories on to others. An individual who had himself survived many diseases was considered a sage. Such people often watched the animals and observed nature's own therapies and treatments. In certain eras, the lines between the species were not completely drawn, and there were long periods where men and animal mixed and learned from each other. Man's imagination made him a great maker of myths. Myths, as you know them, represent bridges of psychological activity and point quite clearly to patterns of perception and behavior through which, in your terms, the race passed as it traveled to its present state. Mythology bridges the gap between instinctive knowledge and the individualization of idea. When an animal is sick, it immediately begins to remedy the situation, and unconsciously it knows what to do. It does not bother thinking in your terms of good and evil. It does not wonder what it did to get into such a situation. It does not think of itself as inferior. It automatically begins its own therapy. A human being, however, has another dimension to deal with, a new area of creativity, a diverse mixture of beliefs. His or her ideas about the self must be examined, for they are being materialized in flesh. Again, the situation has great complexity, for the condition is still a healthy attempt on the part of the body to maintain balance. Overall, there is also the world's situation to be taken into consideration, the status of the species on the planet, in which, say, overpopulation problems will bring about death to ensure new growth. The individuals alive at such a time will also have a hand in such decisions, however. Once more, because you are self-conscious beings, your beliefs regulate your reality. An animal knows unconsciously that it is unique and has a place in the scheme of being. Its sense of grace is built in. Your free will allows for the freedom of any belief, including ones that say you are unworthy with no right to your existence. If you misinterpret the myths, then you may believe that man has fallen from grace, and that his very creaturehood is cursed, in which case you will not trust your body or allow it its quote-unquote natural patterns of self-therapy. In order for consciousness to develop in your terms, there must be freedom for the exploration of all ideas, individually and en masse. Each of you are living entities, growing toward your own development. Each of your beliefs, therefore, has its own unique origin and feeling patterns. So you must for yourself travel back through your beliefs and your own feelings until intellectually and emotionally you realize your rightness, your complete original existence in time and space as you know it. This knowing will give you the conscious knowledge that is a counterpart of the animal's unconscious comprehension.